move the discussion on a bit from some of what that book is about, and look in particular at the sort of architectural aspects of what makes places to live work or not work, but very much in the context of the situation that we know we're in, of a severe housing crisis that's been going on for God knows how long, a government which came to power sort of talking more about the housing crisis than any previous government had in recent times, and which indeed took some steps to addressing it, but which steps may not be wholly effective, and which also very much raise the question of architectural quality or the lack thereof. You know, most of the noises we've been getting from the government have been about quantity over quality, about just building sheer numbers, primarily through kind of relaxing the planning system in the belief that house builders will magically rise up and to occupy the space that is created by regulation, which is not happening yet, and I'm sceptical if it ever will happen. Has a final extra chapter called How to Solve a Housing Crisis, and so that looks at some of the issues around policy that might actually make a difference. As I say, I want to talk tonight specifically about the kind of architectural aspects of housing. I tried to identify 6 things that are important to making things work. I mean, this is obviously when I talk about beautiful housing, I'm aware of the kind of create streets definition of beauty, which we sort of know what that is, that beauty equals what was done in the past. And it's also very much about the sort of mugshot of a building. Do you like this building? And post a photograph online, traditional, and do you not like this building? And you post a photograph of something modern, which obviously is a very superficial way of doing it. You'll also be conscious of Thomas Heatherwick's Humanise campaign, which possibly also is a bit superficial in some ways. But I think the fact that these 2 kind of movements are gaining traction is actually a sign of a slight failure by the architectural world to express itself better about what really should be happening and what architects can contribute. And as somebody who writes a lot about architecture, I sort of take it slightly personally. You know, I feel that I haven't, for my part, expressed it well enough. These are six important aspects of architecture, planning, house building in approximately ascending scale. So making details, materials, construction, space, what's around you, what a room is like, what the light is like. Freedom is the ability of a place where you live to allow you to do your own thing and be yourself. Identity is what it looks like, what does it say about you, what kind of a place do you want to live in. Neighbourhood is what is the place around you like, not just other people being extremely important, but also the natural world, the built world around you. So, you know, the very obvious fact that a house does not exist on its own, or a flat does not exist on its own. And planet is the environment. What is the project doing towards sustainability and reducing or even reversing carbon emissions? I'm going to look at 4 projects that illustrate these in different ways. This is the housing in the Balearic Islands, created under the patronage of IBAVI, which is a public agency responsible for housing. And this is a really extraordinary endeavour, which unfortunately has come to an end largely due to a change in government. And it's about building social housing using the resources that are available, both the human and the material resources available nearby. That means opening up stone quarries, training up people to build in stone and other techniques, also using waste materials, using things like seaweed to build affordable housing, which is also extremely sustainable in use. So they managed to build social housing in solid stone without an insane budget, which is sort of an incredible achievement. And so obviously they also helped the local economy. They didn't get things from other countries. They create absolutely lovely places to live, which also, because they're made of stone, perform extremely well thermally, so they have no air conditioning. and require very little heating, which, as well as the environmental benefits, is obviously a huge economic benefit to the people who live there. Sort of very delightfully planned. So you have these sort of shared spaces where you have apartments with a kind of open walkway between them, very nice gradations of public and private, and indoor and outdoor. They also use techniques like this for ventilating a house, so you have a little atrium with windows that open up at the top. You have a stack effect and the hot air leaves the building. These projects are obviously extremely specific to their location. You couldn't exactly do the equivalent in Britain. We don't have that sort of, we don't have those kind of quarries and stone, traditions of stone construction that you can draw on, and also not suit our climate so well. But I think it's absolutely inspiring in terms of what can be done if you take a different attitude to building. This is a British example. It's a bit less adventurous in its construction, but it describes itself as the largest co-housing project in Britain. It's in Bridport in Dorset. It's by Barefoot architects who are based in Bristol, and it's a community that got together and organised themselves to build housing, which is also usable by, available to people coming from outside, but they do have to sign up to the principles of the place. And it's a bit of land on the edge of the town, fairly normal kind of housing, well done, not sort of super dramatic architecturally. But the important thing about it is that the space between the housing is available for different uses. There's bits in front of the houses that are people's private gardens, but then there's other communal gardens, communal growing areas. It's all managed in common by the people who live there. And you can't drive a car in there. You have to leave your car, I think, walk the short distance to your home. And it's all simple stuff, with the result that all these places are occupied by children playing, people hanging out, stuff that was just absolutely normal in the past, but which has somewhat been forgotten. Solar panels, so that goes into a great battery which powers the place. Just really basic things like having a bench outside your front door, which encourages people to sit outside, connect with each other. No fences around the gardens. You have swales, so all the rainwater goes into swales which run through the development, and then just very decent, well-planned, pleasant interiors. This I expect a lot of you know, but I think it's worth bringing up because it's absolutely brilliant. This is Peter Barber's Edgewood Mews, extremely difficult site next to the North Circular, and just brilliantly squeezing as much as possible out of the space while making a sheltered shared space in the middle. Again, that encourages people to know each other while also giving them the space to retreat into. And it has a thing that you don't see an awful lot of in new housing, which is personality, invention, wit. It's the sort of thing that maybe has people running to Thomas Heatherwick and create streets. The lack of personality on a lot of new housing, but this has it in spades. But of course, these are all new buildings, and as the architectural and construction world has finally become aware in the last few years, building is tends to be a carbon-intensive, energy-consuming activity. The importance of retrofit, which is now very high on the agenda, but it's still not really on the agenda when it comes to new housing. So when the government talks about 1.5 million new houses, you know they mean new build. That's what they picture in their head. But that's not really good enough. There was a study done that said if we built at the rate the government wants to build, I think by 2030 something, we would more than blow the entire carbon budget for the country just through the carbon costs of construction. So we want to look at retrofits. This is one very well-known example. Lacaton Vassal, well known but for a very good reason, which is big housing estate in Bordeaux, problematic 1960s housing types and need a renovation. Instead of demolishing them and rebuilding them, or doing the thing of just sticking cladding on to improve their performance, Lacaton Vassal added a whole layer of winter gardens and balconies, which were kind of in spatial terms surplus to the brief, but they created a kind of free additional space for people to use. They made the flats much more attractive, while also doing everything that was required in terms of thermal performance and keeping the weather out. And then the architects commissioned or took these photographs of all the different ways in which people sort of adapted and modified their spaces. And they've done other projects of a similar kind in Paris. Okay, so there's the projects, and I'm just going to go through the points I started off with and sort of show how these projects illustrate these points. So making, this is the Abavi projects. Very obviously the way that they're made out of stone, the details that are used make a huge contribution to the quality of living in the place. Space, Lacaton Vassal, they create a kind of spatial generosity of a kind that you don't usually get in social housing. Freedom, the ability to personalise, live in the space as you want to, grow things, make it your own. Very important, maybe not talked about enough. Identity. So all the projects look completely different from each other. They're all valid ways of building, valid forms of appearance, valid styles. You know, one of the things that is sort of really dislikable about Creative Streets in particular is the way they take the argument that people like old buildings, which they do, but then saying therefore absolutely every building has to be sort of look old in the same way. I think it's really important that whatever is built has a diversity of identities and allows that. Neighbourhood, pretty straightforward, but it's about the spaces between the buildings, relationships to its surroundings. So the photos I've got of the Bridport scheme don't especially show it, but it's got sort of quite beautiful rolling countryside around it. So when you're in there, you feel that connection to the surroundings, and that's part of the experience. And as architects, you know, a very big part of the job is not just the building, but what the building enables you to enjoy about what's around you. Planet, I mean, these really speak for themselves. Ibavi is about extremely low energy, low carbon forms of both construction and in use. Lacaton Vassal, through their techniques, potentially massively reduce the embodied energy costs of knocking down and rebuilding. Okay, and then I'll just show you what we're probably going to get instead if we're not very careful, and and what is actually wrong with it. The thing most obviously wrong with it is the space between the buildings. I mean, the individual houses, you can take them or leave them. They're not wonderful, but lots of people would be perfectly happy with a house like that. But the really shocking thing is the way the space gets eaten up by roads, parking, pieces of grass that have no real purpose, don't really seem to have an idea of how people are going to use them. Not much thought about how you get from one place to another. Very little thought about how people communicate with each other. And then this thing, if you build a garage, double garage, one's for one house, okay, but anyway, you build a garage and then you set it back, so you have all this apron of asphalt in front. But the very huge challenge is, apart from just creating affordable, accessible homes at all, is how are they not going to be like this?
That was fantastic, Rowan. Thank you very, very much. And I think there's another book brewing in there with those 6 very elegantly created themes.
Very early stages.
Fantastic. I'm going to start with the elephant in the room about what happened on late last week in terms of our I think we were on a call as I found out that there was our change in
that Angela Rayner was was gone, yes.
So if we start with that in terms of, I guess the starting point of this was around saying the government's got this very ambitious mission to build 1.5 million homes, which would be extraordinary if it got even near that. I think the starting point for this conversation was what will the quality of those homes and the beauty of those homes, will the government be able to retain that quality as they deliver? Now, I guess an open-ended question in terms of, do you think that delivery has been massively compromised by this change in leadership and therefore that knock-on effect to quality as it trickles through?
No. I think what Angela Rayner brought to this was some energy and charisma, and I think she sort of genuinely cares about these issues. Don't think she'd shown she'd shown very little interest in design at all. Yep. And I don't think she actually had very good ideas about how to achieve the numbers. Pennycook is probably a more thoughtful person, has a bit less oomph, so we'll see.
Yep.
But yes, I mean, Angela Rayner, she unfortunately kind of fell for this argument that the only thing that's holding back housing is the planning system and regulation. And if you loosen the nuts and bolts on the planning system, then this sort of pent-up desire to build houses will be released, and then through the laws of supply and demand, prices will come down. And there's many reasons why that isn't likely to happen. To follow on that theme, in your book Property, which I think most people here will be getting a copy of afterwards, you talk about kind of those big structural reasons as to how we end up with some of the homes that we end up with, and land is obviously a big part of that, especially in the British approach and psyche. To what extent, kind of with the planning system being loosened now and things like trying to free up building on the green belt, grey belt, however we define it, that has the kind of the volume, it's playing into the hand of the volume house builders, and that train has to an extent left the station already? Well, over the last 40, 50 years since Margaret Thatcher, we have created a housing economy and indeed a sort of national economy that is based on high land values and increasingly high land values, and that's a very hard drug to come off. The problem with the idea that loosening up the planning system is the answer is it ignores the fact that house builders don't really want the value of their product to come down. So Oliver Letwin report, I don't know how many people are familiar with this, but a few years ago the Conservative Minister Oliver Letwin wrote a report, actually extremely good report, in which among other things he pointed out that the phenomenon of absorption means that you're never going to get house building in numbers that will really bring prices down. And that is simply house builders don't want to build in the numbers that will lower their prices. They'll stop building when prices stop dropping, they'll stop building. So the idea that we can just leave it all to the market is really misplaced.
And how much of this is around the frameworks of volume house building, around how they typically operate, around being able to get in? I mean, a lot of the examples you've shown here were very talented, quite relatively small schemes with very talented designers working with that. And one of my questions around the scalability of some of these solutions, about how you can, I guess, roll out to meet the demand of some of those things around volume house building. So I guess a question to you around that piece, around matching talent with people who are currently mainly delivering. And then it'd be interesting to hear from anyone from the audience who'd like to share an anecdote about that as well. Please.
So the other day I went to see the film Fernand Pouillon, France's Most Wanted Architect. Oh, yeah. Don't know if you know this guy.
No, I don't.
He's a French architect.
I know about Pouillon.
Pouillon, yeah,
Pouillon, sorry.
that's the one. The thing that's interesting about him regarding volume house building, if you like, is that he managed to do it simply because the primary material that he used was immediately available, just like with the Abbey, exactly the same principles. I was there 2 months ago. Stone, natural load-bearing stone, something that we've lost. Volume house builders will tell you supply chains are the reason why they can't sort of build economically, because they're subject to the rigours of the market for the supply chains that they use. And those tend to be high embodied carbon, usually extremely sort of like far-flung supply chains with lots of inputs, lots of processing, lots of guff. And obviously they are limited in terms of time and speed because of this, because it's not direct. I mean, Ferdinand Bouillon, he kind of pioneered the kind of setting up the supply chain such that the quarry cut the stone in the morning and then installed it in the afternoon. Now, for that to happen here, we'd have to almost take our quarries and maybe in a very top-down sort of manner kind of institute some sort of, resource of national strategic importance, just like we have with steel, and literally tell the quarries to mobilise in a way that no private market has ever been asked to do before, right? Now, that could be done, and there is a group of us that are trying to get that done. But it's obviously, when you come up against the politics and you come up against the market sort of, forces, it becomes incredibly difficult. It's starting to happen obviously with timber in a very good way, but obviously timber is quite even more difficult than stone in the sense that it's got the combustibility element.
Exactly.
So if it's happening for timber, it just strikes me as odd that it hasn't already happened for stone. But again, that's moving in the right direction, and there will be a few things coming up soon.
Okay.
Interesting.
So you think this could happen? I mean, because also stone is just not on the agenda at all as a volume house building material in Britain at the moment.
Look at the cost coefficients that people like Gilles Perraudin in the south of France are achieving using dimensional stone. It's like 1,800 euros a square metre, and they're building social housing of extremely high quality in those areas. Look at Archipelago in Switzerland, and they're gorgeous load-bearing stone sort of structures. The other thing that they do, and the thing that stone kind of allows you to do, is reduce element count. The Ibabi, Carlos Oliver, who's one of the architects in the Ibabi sort of cohort, he talks about just be dumb about it. One stone on top of another. What else do you need? That's your structure. Now, don't get me wrong, it's Mallorca, so the environment's very different. The thermals, exactly. But don't get me wrong, here, all you need is that cavity, all you need is that membrane, your insulation, and then another layer of stone on the inside, ideally. But on the outside, you have your rain screen.
Yeah.
Can also be done with stone.
It's an very, very interesting material point around that. Thank you. Any other lessons in terms of volume house building people would like to share, or working with a volume house builder?
Hi. I think there's a thing, thank you, Rowan, that's really interesting. I mean, I think the UK examples, it seems to me like the Barefoot and the Peace Barbecue, both have a really strong attitude towards what the spaces outside and between houses are for. And one of the things that they're really certain about is they're not for cars, right?
Yeah.
And they're not for rubbish trucks to come around and pick up the rubbish once a week. And I think that's a very different attitude to the example you showed of kind of the what not to do.
Yeah.
And I'm quite interested to know who you think, or what your gut feel is in terms of why those have ended up in such a different place in terms of their attitude. It's a bit like the next talk. I know, sorry, which we're coming to. You can't.
I'll see you there.
But yeah. But who's the person there who's managed to persuade what gets delivered to not kind of prioritise the car?
I'd like to hear from the people with direct experience of this world, but
Yeah.
as I understand it, you have highways engineers, you have what's regarded as what you need for cars and emergency vehicles and refuse vehicles, and their turning circles and their sight lines, and sort of ignoring the fact that a city like London is almost entirely made of streets that don't comply with those standards. And then the house builders seem to take the line of least resistance.
Yeah.
And rather than challenge those things, they say, okay, well, these are the rules, we're just going to build. Yeah. I mean, I was, a while ago, the late Tony Pidgley of Berkeley Homes took me to his Kidbrooke development. And he wanted to show me something he was really proud of, which is he'd got a way of designing a house that was really space efficient, had a kind of quite ingenious section and plan, and it wasn't bad, but outside it there was this kind of prairie-like road. So I said, well, you know, if you made the road smaller, you wouldn't have to do these kind of gymnastics with the planning. And I don't fully understand it, because obviously space is money, land is money. So why big house builders are so willing just to kind of give it away like that, I don't fully understand it.
Yeah, I think we, you know, outside London, we find that highways departments have an enormous amount of power.
Yeah.
And are more interested in rubbish trucks than people. And I don't know how to react. Like, honestly, if I could, I'd retrain them all and give them different job titles, you know. But I don't know.
And also the buyers, I mean, maybe the buyers think they want it because they have cars, they think they have to have cars, because it's a sort of circular argument. You live in a place like that, you have to have a car, so therefore they quite like an environment that's very sort of car friendly. But maybe Arthur's going to tell us this.
I mean, I agree with all of that, and it comes back to this big point around, I think maybe it's in your final point there around the natural environment, but it's this question about where we build is so relevant to it, and it doesn't mean where in terms of like which kind of, whether you're here or there specifically, but in terms of, are you in a place with frankly a kind of transit oriented option around it, because those are the options there which were, they're essentially fields and green fields rather than on the edge of or in cities, and so it means, I mean, it's a very simplistic argument, but if you have the option, I mean, now in the London plan, cars are being designed or codified and designed out, versus in a large part of our country and large part of the world, cars are required through codification. So my argument would be it comes a lot around essentially transit-oriented design. But that kind of brings me to a question to pick up on that and around this point on code.
Before we move on, I just want to go back to what we were saying about what you asked about building at scale.
Yeah.
There is an example, which I have shown in previous talks, which is a place called Holton outside Rugby, which is developed by developers Urban and Civic. And this is going to be about 6,000 homes in the end. They built quite a lot of them. And this is a piece of land that was a radio station, therefore was called brownfield land, even though it was kind of green, really. And they did a master plan that's all about routes between the houses that are planted, which has walkable cycleways. The old control building of the radio station they made into the school, so that's a kind of building of kind of personality and character. They also decided that the school is the most important public building in a place like that. And then they parcel out the land, and then individual house builders come and build their kind of normal stuff, slightly better standard than usual. But what's really good about that is the master plan. So you do have very nice spaces with water and plants, and you can walk to school, cycle to school, go to the shops, etc. And it's commercial. It happened with the help of Homes England. It probably couldn't have happened on its own. But so it's not architecturally amazing, but in terms of the planning, it's really good, and we should see more things than that.
Interesting. And what I'm struck by a bit is this places in between point, which is completely valid, is a relatively inexpensive compared to the other stuff. The land and the actual building is the relatively cheaper part of some of this stuff. So I'm interested, do we have any landscape architects in the room, or?
Oh, we do it.
We do as well. Any transport planners, dare I ask? They stay away. Any planners?
Is anyone seeing any changes from highways engineers?
Yeah.
They're just the same.
In London.
Are they becoming more?
Yeah, I do. Rain
Sure, in London they are,
and, reducing carriageway bits.
Yeah.
I think in some boroughs it is.
Yeah.
The kind of cities in London, cities in general are doing a lot better than it's kind of a rural urban.
Can I just say, just having worked on a HAB scheme with Kevin Cloud and Isabel Allen, which others have done as well, where you're coming up against that, you're confronting this highways mentality and what I found interesting when you compare what's available in the market, that lovely image at the end, versus these dreamy other projects which are all about sharing space, is how the car in Britain seems to resist that. There's this, or even with Kevin McLeod behind us and the best will in the world, we were still had to put cars outside people's front doors. And I just wonder if it is kind of part of a Daily Mail sort of mentality of insecurity and fear. People don't want to be far from their cars.
Yeah, for sure.
And that came from, whenever I think of the word urban design, I think of the first lecture I had about it when Marcia Leschny got up and said, cities need, people want security, they want safety. And if you think about the political climate we're in now, where there's such distrust of otherness and other people, I thought that housing that you showed actually typifies the kind of way the political sensibility we've got these days is about, I want my house, my front door, my bit of green, my verge, my. And there are people who do want to share, but the market it's a trick that the market hasn't worked out. There are a lot of people who do like sharing, and they're not.
Also, if it makes you more secure if you're sharing.
Yeah, but that's based on in antithesis of what Thatcher and home ownership is all about, which is about I can take care of myself, my own individual needs are looked after, etc.
Yeah, absolutely, no, that's absolutely
So
fundamental.
it feels like the market has the capacity to absorb it if we could.
And it becomes self-fulfilling, doesn't it? It's
security, it breeds and risk. So home ownership is all about risk as well. It's about I feel unsafe, so I'm going to buy my own thing. Oh shit! Now I've bought my own thing. I feel really unsafe because I've got to secure it. So so I think this idea of risk risk and security for me was part of that. Sort of cut through a lot of.
And well, because of the home being an asset more than a home, people become very paranoid about anything that reduces the value of their home. So that makes them more and more conservative with every size of C attached to it. Candy, you worked on Phoenix and Lewis, yeah?
Yeah, let's hope that comes out of the ground.
Yeah, how's it going, is it?
Well, they're still raising money just to do flood defences and things. But
that
there was a
hasn't-
big parking barn at one
That's why I
end.
was asking, yeah, because there's a model where you don't have a car outside your front door there, yeah.
So you can drop things outside your front door, but then you go back to this kind of timber-clad, what do they call it? Multimodal hub or something where there's lots of cargo bikes on the ground floor, and there's a nudge economy that tries to make it a little bit more of a faff to go and pick up your car than maybe share a car. Or I think that's all designed to have a second life as a different kind of building too. But I think that it's really interesting, the fear element that you're talking about, and that those closely boarded fences at the back of house builder land, they're so sad. If you imagine a few dogs in each of them, it's really grim, isn't it? And how do you think that, or maybe it's a question to Arthur as well, how can we have more co-housing, more green banks which will fund communities so that people have more of a stake in the actual production and design and ownership? Because I think that we're a really creative country, but none of that's unleashed, is it? It's all,
I don't really know the answer, except the more positive examples that exist, the better, but that's a slow business. But also, if they were positively supported by government, that would make a big difference. Because, in my book, I was kind of hoping that community land trusts would be more of an answer than they turned out to be. Because there are good, successful community land trusts, but they're kind of hard work, and they're never going to be more than a niche option.
it seemed like in 2010 they were going to whoosh.
So because they are quite hard to achieve, but the ones that succeed do have a pretty good nudge from local or national government, which including the Bridport one. And yeah, so I think it does have to come from central government, basically. It just has to be a policy change to encourage it.
I'm very struck by how a conversation seemingly about beauty is taking down a route of almost kind of certainly political philosophy, even anthropology, even in terms of kind of what is it that kind of some of these pieces around that the fear and what makes those fences so high. I was struck. I was on one of the most westerly islands in the British Isles a couple of weeks ago, and I was amazed on a very nerdy holiday with a tour with an archaeologist who showed me a wall which was 2,000 years BC with a row of rocks along it as a field marker, and I was very surprised to hear that even then people were denoting on what looked like a pretty rubbish bit of land, denoting this is mine and that's yours kind of thing. So it's interesting how some of the pieces are very deep in terms of obviously the shared space and the high wall, and in terms of like, is this, well, the question to you, how this kind of terror, as you say in here in terms of the opening chapters, every animal has property, every tree has property, they have their light, and you see the trees kind of waving between, they have a little kind of wall of space between the two that are not getting in each other's space. So how kind of fundamental it is to being like a living thing is having some territory that is mine, to take the fear piece versus this idea of kind of being all communal living. And obviously there's a balance there, but you know.
Yeah, I mean dogs have territory. It's a very fundamental thing, but that's not quite the same thing as private property where a line is drawn around it and this is all mine and this is all yours. And also animals, as well as having territory, also have sharing space, as do humans. So the idea that you prioritise the sort of the individual territory concept over everything else is wrong. But just to say about community land trusts, I mean, these kind of shared spaces can be achieved without those kind of ownership structures. You can just build it in quite a simple way. Requires a little bit more effort by the developer. But then another issue then is the sort of what kind of person is the freeholder or the developer. So the example I was talking about outside Rugby is, it's a property company, but it's a property company that had a lot of London experience, but crucially they were funded in a different way from your typical house builder. So a typical house builder once they get around to building a house, they just want to build it and sell it and move on and not worry about the land anymore. The funding model for this place Holton is that people took a long-term investment in it, so it mattered to them what it's going to be like in 20, 30 years' time. So therefore, it mattered to them what the landscape is about. So whereas a volume house builder will try very hard not to plant a tree, and literally, they really don't want to plant trees, and not to install anything that needs maintenance or care. These people in Rugby do want to plant trees because it's worth it to them, because it means the place is worth more in the future. So that is a fairly unradical way of achieving very simple benefits. But even that only happened because Homes England was involved. So you did need a bit of a nudge from a government agency to make it happen. Not a massive one, not a massive amount of public funding, but it was not the model of just let's pass like land and sell it and let people do what they want with it.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask a kind of controversial challenge. I reckon if the late Roger Scruton was here, or Nick Boyd-Smith was here, or Thomas Heatherwick was here, I reckon they'd actually quite like the examples you've shown today, because I think they are kind of thoughtful versions of gentle density.
They wouldn't
different
like
ways
that
of
kind
living.
of a style, but anyway,
Well, they're broadly like, let's say, 4 out of 5 or whatever it has to be. What, if you were to give the kind of generous interpretation of the kind of Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission, I'm not sure how familiar you are with this one, I won't comment on it, but a controversial piece of work, what would you say the kind of bits you agree with and bits you disagree with?
Well, there's a bit in there, there's a bit of sort of reasonably common sense, the sort of Poundbury kind of planning, Poundbury is sort of what lies behind all of this, and Poundbury is kind of not bad in terms of its sort of walkability and its sort of neighbourliness, and its mixed uses up to a point, and its shared spaces, and so one of the reasons why Poundbury got so much traction is because the alternatives were so poor. So Poundbury is not bad in some of those respects, and better than most of what's available. And then there's a look of it, and from my point of view, if people want to live in houses that look like that, then that's absolutely fine by me. But I find it very depressing, the idea that everywhere new has to look like that. And there's also a very obvious risk, which is that it gives house builders a very cheap and superficial way to get planning permission. So, if the idea is that you can get planning permission by building beautiful, and building beautiful means a range of things, but including a very superficial kind of look, then what is likely to happen is you'll get people doing sort of very, very bad. They'll do the cornices and the porticos, and then they'll skimp on the public space and the tree planting.
But haven't they got? I mean, I don't like Poundbury at all, and I'm just being provocative here. But don't they get it? With what you're arguing, don't they get 95% right? And you're not a big fan of the cornices and the picket fences, but actually get rid of those, make it a bit more modernist, and we're good to go.
If this whole building beautiful stuff results in things planned like the Bridport co-housing or the thing in Rugby I was describing, if it results in reasonably well-planned communities that are not car dependent, that have good shared space, that have good use of nature and planting, that have maybe mixed use, mixed tenure, walkability, and every single one looks like Poundbury, that's not the worst possible outcome. But I think the other problem is that they are, it's a bit, like I say, it's depressing for me, but there's plenty of other places that I can, live in and look at. But I find that narrowness unnecessary. But so, there is common ground there. But then the other thing is, I think that they don't really know. They're not very smart about really how to do the planning well and do the sustainability well. An example of that is I'm working on an article about a gigantic solar farm that's proposed near Blenheim Palace on land that belongs to the Blenheim estate, which is the Duke of Marlborough and his family. And there's and it's absolutely massive, this solar farm. And although I support solar farms, I'm kind of a bit doubtful about this one because it's just so colossal. And lots of local outrage about it, and they correctly think that this is really about making more money for the Duke of Marlborough. But the other thing that the Blenheim estate have been doing is they've been building a lot of housing, and they've been building it on sort of Duchy of Cornwall lines. So again, it's all sort of traditional style using, interesting to know if the stone is actually local, but it looks local. But those houses don't have solar panels because they said, oh, that's bad for urban design. So the people who want to cover 840 hectares of countryside with solar panels won't put them on the houses they build because that's not out of the sort of Duchy of Cornwall playbook. And I think, a problem with this kind of fixation with that particular narrow idea of style is you just take away flexibility, so you can't have the kind of creativity of coming up with truly environmental solutions that you can have if you're a bit freer.
And this brings me, I'm going to ask my last question, then open it up in proper to the floor. What I was trying to ask earlier was a bit about kind of codes, because what governments like to do is they like to find a few examples that look good, then reverse engineer it into a different some kind of planning or code system, and then roll it out. And you end up with this kind of strange piece in terms of the skill of the architect is then constrained. You end up in some of these perverse decisions like no solar panels with a solar farm next door.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you were with the new housing minister, if you were with the UK's chief planner, if you were kind of brought in as the kind of special advisor to a late career spad into the Labour government, how would you be advising them on to think about some of these things?
I have met some of these people under the former government, and I did have an opportunity to shape their little minds, but maybe they weren't susceptible to being shaped. But I mean, in theory, codes could be okay if the good thing about codes is it allows people who may not have the resources to think for themselves all that much, just to kind of get on and do it. And London is shaped by the London Building Act that came after the Great Fire. I'm sure everyone here knows this. So Georgian Victorian London looks the way it does because of a whole lot of rules about how close a window can be to the party wall, how you detail a party wall when it goes through the roof, how deep is set the window should be back from the front of the building, etc. And that enabled a whole lot of builders who were not particularly sort of architecturally intelligent or particularly skilled at building even, to build a huge number of houses which are kind of pretty successful, that people like living in, that created a kind of urbanity that's quite successful. So if someone could come up with codes now that achieved that, I wouldn't be against it. But I don't know, I haven't really seen it happen recently. Not for about 300 years. And the other great example is the New York zoning laws from 1915 or something like that, which were about daylight, so which gives you the classic Manhattan-shaped skyscraper that goes like that. That's great, combined with a gridded street plan. But I mean, maybe a good start would be to get away from the codes that actually drive bad design, like the
So it's almost a step back in
stuff.
because there's that tension between
rule them out, but
I guess there's what I'm trying to drive at. There's this tension between freedom, which is fantastic if you have highly talented people here and on the screen here, but also quite annoying if you end up everyone with the freedom to then build their fences and their gardens and their all these. So as in like there's the two sides of that coin in terms of if you want to ensure the built environment does end up with the quality that everyone in this room wants, then there's that tension between I guess trust and freedom and all those things, which I'll maybe leave as an open-ended point. We're gonna go through as many questions as we can, so if you can try and keep them relatively short, and then we can try and take maybe two at a time if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Please.
The previous Labour government set up CABE and then CABE Space. Should there be something like that set up again, and who do you think is most capable of influencing the current government?
Yes, would be good. I mean, one of the reasons why we have Create Streets is because Cave disappeared, so it's kind of filling the same kind of space in a different way. I don't see it happening though. Just not. This government is not interested in this kind of thing. I mean, Cave came out of the sort of, you know, Richard Rogers' closeness to Tony Blair and just a whole culture that is not there.
So that kind of master builder, political whisperer kind of thing, that kind of, because it's very, very influential in the turn of the millennium.
And if Cave was there, you'd think it would be doing really good stuff on housing. Yeah.
Indeed.
Is Heatherwick trying to fill that gap a bit?
Yeah, he's also filling that gap. Don't quite know where he's heading.
Well, he's heading for more work first.
But he's definitely trying to fill the Richard Rogers gap. Where it heads in terms of kind of institutions that might be created, I don't know.
Interesting. Any questions from the back over here? Or in the centre here, please.
So I was quite inspired by the idea of connecting retrofitting and the 1.5 million home building, because I saw retrofitting is kind of inherently excluded from the government's agenda. So can you elaborate a little more about how to connect these two, or like how can we maybe use
Sorry, connect what and what?
Retrofit.
Retrofit. Oh,
With the government housing targets.
Yeah.
Great question.
Okay, well, something I didn't really talk about, but which is, you know, maybe we don't need 1.5 million new homes. Because the problem with housing in the country is much more about affordability than numbers of homes. And work has been done that argues that there's enough built domestic space in the country for everyone to live in. The problem is with how it's distributed and what it costs. So what the road we're going down at the moment is this idea: build lots of houses and prices will come down. And I think what's going to happen is we're not going to build all those houses. The ones that are going to be built are going to be quite terrible, and prices will not come down in a significant way. So there's a whole other area of work, which is beyond my expertise, but it's how you use fiscal means, how you use the tax system to make housing more affordable. Which basically means an economic plan where slowly lowering house prices is seen as a public benefit, whereas until now, house price inflation has been seen as a benefit. So ever since the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher was very proud of bringing down inflation on every single commodity except houses, and she's very proud of increasing prices on houses. And that remained the culture for decades. The politicians would say, front pages of newspapers would say, it's great, house prices went up 15% last year. And that's now, enough people have, on the wrong side of that equation that people don't talk like that anymore. But yeah, so the problem of affordability of housing is being created more by economic policy than by planning and architectural policy.
To the specific point around getting the retrofit numbers into the housing numbers, because I think these are, and also you go into good amount of detail on it in the book as well, in terms of the property and democracy stuff.
Okay,
but I'm not sure if it does count at the moment.
My point about that is that therefore you could potentially house everyone using the stock we already have, if you twiddle the economic dials rather than retrofit is included in the housing numbers in the sense that if somebody converts a factory into homes and those homes get sold or whatever, they get rented out, that will show up in the housing numbers. So that will be part of the 1.5 million. but the mentality, so statistically they are counted, but there's not the mentality in government of saying, well, how do we really achieve this? How do we really encourage it? Yeah, it's not the imagination there.
Can I see lots of hands, because I'm going to ask 2 questions at a time to meet, so we'll go one at the front here and the one at the gentleman at the back here. Do you want to go first?
Sure.
And then you.
I thought the really interesting, you brought up the example of Halton, and I only think of this because I was there last week, but there's a real lack of shared amenity. A lot of the targets are hit by like a David Lloyd club or a primary school that is a feeder already for a grammar school, so it's already kind of an elitist setting. And I saw an amazing statistic the other day that one of the real crises in Britain especially is that the high street used to provide 10 hours of free childcare every day, which doesn't exist anymore. And I wonder whether these new developments, because they no longer provide like really clear spaces for play, maybe that's what they lack in their beauty. I know that the buildings are not beautiful, I think objectively, but I wonder if there's a beauty in the community that is lost, and maybe that's the real key in providing homes that work in future.
Well, that's absolutely part of it. And yeah, I mean, that should be basic, fundamental to any new housing development of any size, that it has shared play space. And the beauty of the Bridport place is the whole place is a play space. Your kids can literally go anywhere safely, and then there's a kind of little field out the back, and there's a bit of wood out the back, and so on. That's all part of it. But yeah, play space should be fundamental because it's obviously important for the children, but then what happens around it is also important.
So excellent brief writers needed in terms of including these all.
And if you're going to have a design code, it should just say play space.
Yeah.
Good start.
I've moved developer side recently, and one particular agent that's quite interesting and often overlooked in the whole process is the oracle of the real estate sector, which is the estate agent. You will get this if you do this. People, incredible force for conservatism, right? And also some of the most unimaginative people you will ever meet. You put things in front of them, they refer to the previous. I mean, they literally are the repository of what's happened before and what will happen again. And all of those things that we talk about, how the hell do you value them? You know, especially the shared stuff, especially the stuff that sticks people to place and doesn't allow property and value to move quickly, because that's what they like. They like quick sell, quick lease, quick this, turn it over, flip it again. That's completely anathema to everything that we talk about when we come to beauty. Beauty doesn't it's not fleeting. It stays, it grows, evolves, it flowers, you know what I mean? So that's one thing that I honestly think they're possibly one of the biggest sort of anchors or kind of constraints. And the only way to sort of move them is to show them the money. They're the most kind of mercenary of all of us in a sense, because they don't really sort of do anything by values, they do things by, will it sell? How much commission am I going to get? So something there, I think that's actually a place to target. And what's interesting about it, I work a lot with group work, and there's a bespoke agent, there's a estate agent. They worked on really high selling sort of projects of group works and are really fans, and it's like, let's do it again. So you can actually change them, but it's got to be on the basis of something that you've done before. And I think that's quite an interesting sort of stumbling point that could be addressed in order to deliver that.
Interesting. And I guess the kind of knock-on effect that design, I mean, there's some reports about how design quality or things like sustainability can be reverse engineered into values, but maybe the data's not. And I guess the big advisory firms, the JLLs, the Savills, the Cushmans of this world, are the hidden beasts, especially behind some of these bigger schemes as well. What are your thoughts on that in terms of let's call it the advisory model and then the agent model, because they're two different but often the same people.
I mean, of course, you hear the same complaint in the commercial property business of letting agents. And it's absolutely true, and it might be possible to educate estate agents a little bit through showing them successful examples. But it's also just fundamental to the sort of world we got into of where individual private ownership is seen as almost the only desirable model of form of tenure, from, you know, that's in terms of what people are expected to want, and then that then is part of a kind of speculative what's the word? Paradigm, if you like, that people, you know, are so obsessed with the value of maintaining the value of their property or seeing it increase.
In this country, because like
this country
specifically,
well,
because
some other countries, but
agreed, like
America, for example.
Yeah, Canada, for example, built to rent sector is
but so in a way, the estate agents you're talking about are a symptom of that. So this massive conservatism is built into that. So part of the solution is to broaden the kind of tenures that are available.
I'm going to take the final. There's a gentleman there, and last question, and then two more questions if anyone else.
Okay.
So here and here. Super. Thank you.
Further to that, read a study somewhere saying, you know, looking at GDP of various countries and comparing that to tenure types, and countries that have generally lower GDP per capita also would have higher percentage of people owning their own property, whereas the more richer developed countries actually have more tenants, which might be the opposite of what you might expect. But that's partially due to what you mentioned earlier, the whole story around security and risk. I need to own my own house. In this country, at least, you have virtually no protection whatsoever as a tenant in many ways. So a lot of it's also tenancy has to do with the laws around tenancy rather than just the economic models. So there's sort of big thing about that. I don't know if you want to jump in on this. I guess the other, and then maybe going back to a sort of previous topic that might be worth touching on, is sort of land. A lot of this whole building 1.5 million homes thing, there's a very strong focus here on green belts. There's a very strong focus on we build new stuff. The existing towns and villages in this country are built, they are static, they cannot be changed. But if we look to other countries, specifically in Europe, we might find that there is a much stronger movement of working in the existing urban fabric. It happens in London, of course, but much of this country outside of London, no one works in the existing urban fabric. No one, suburban neighbourhoods are built to not change. So there's maybe, it would be very interesting to hear your thoughts on this kind of angle.
Shall we take a bunch of questions?
Yeah, fantastic. And now we'll take the final one. Was it over here on my right? Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So I'm a younger architectural assistant, so I'm incredibly naive, so this question might be a bit overarching, but I think it's widely acknowledged, and in multiple times in this conversation, we've come back to the point that one of the major issues is the financialization of housing. And if theoretically we already have enough housing stock and we don't need to necessarily build more, then what becomes our role as architects in building beautiful homes? When we've already built everything we need, what is then the next movement
skill doing?
Okay, well, I mean, I think more homes will be built, come what may. And, you know, there's also work to be done, retrofitting, on the spaces between buildings, on the sort of Lacaton Vassal kind of work. Maybe there will be less work for architects, full stop. Maybe not.
More barracks.
More barracks.
More refugees.
Refugees. I don't think you're going to have many architects involved in those. But yeah, I mean, I think there will be work for architects, but also, I mean, actually retrofitting, in theory, should actually require more architectural skill, because it's harder than just whacking up a house exactly like all the other houses that you've already built. You know, and there's other building types as well to work on. Yeah, and then, sorry, in terms of that, so talking about, reusing space, existing space in cities. I mean, we did have the whole sort of brownfield agenda that was pushed quite hard, you know, by the Blair government, which made a certain amount of headway, certainly in London. And so there has been quite a lot of building on urban sites. But I'd agree, you know, that continues to be, you know, what should be done, but it's never going to be everything. You're always going to need other kind of housing on other kinds of land. But I would agree the current government's sort of obsession with the green belt is a bit troubling, because it seems like a sort of way of not engaging with these other ways of building housing. By the way, I have written quite a lot about how we should build on the green belt to some extent. Because you know, the green belt was created as supposedly for the benefit of cities, of people living in cities. That was the sort of theory behind it. Cities had to stop sprawling, so people who lived in the cities would have access to the countryside. That's not really how it's worked out. Greenbelt really exists for the benefit of people who live in green belts. And I find the idea that you should just completely freeze the boundaries of cities on the basis of some decisions that were made sort of 50 years ago, that seems wrong to me. And you get situations like Oxford, which has a green belt, which is really constricting the city, really pushing up prices, and also making people live beyond the green belt, so they commute across it, which causes traffic problems. And that seems perverse to me. And sort of the final thing I want to say about green belts is that they're a huge resource of land value, because once you get permission to build on the green belt, then boom, suddenly the values are enormous, which, if you capture that value, in theory should make it possible to build good developments with good shared amenities and good transport and good sustainability. And there have been some sort of interesting proposals of how to do that. But I could go on a great deal of time about that. So my point is, I think, you know, building cities, build on green belts, arguments for both. But what is wrong is just to use the green belt as a sort of limitless resource of land that you just build